Seeing that items 4 through 7 will be continued, and very likely we will hear the items in March, but between now and then, I'm going to instruct that the LA Housing Department convene a series of meetings with tenant and apartment owner advocates and representatives to review the rent study recommendations and bring forward a list of priorities, areas of agreement and/or disagreement, and a potential timeline for follow-up in the next 30 days on the RSO items. So, the Housing Department ready to accept that responsibility? Okay. The fact of the matter is there have been parties that have very different perspectives on this, but not everybody in the city, but many of them have agreed that they would like the opportunity to continue to constructively meet and confer about these matters, and I'm glad to hear that. It seems like the volume is down a bit and the dialogue is up, so that's a good thing. So with that, we'll announce that items 4 through 7 will be continued. Okay, so the cards that were submitted, we'll keep them for the record, and we'll recall individuals as the items come back up. In case you're here, we'll give you the opportunity to speak at that time. We move now to item number 1.
Item number 1 are CDD and CAO reports relative to the acceptance of a $450,000 grant from the State of California Business Transportation and Housing Agency Office of Traffic Safety for the Child Passenger Safety Program.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the members of the committee on item number 1?
Nope.
If not, then what we'll do is we'll adopt the CAO's recommendations. Okay, that item's approved. We now go to item number 2. Please read into the record.
Item number 2 are LAHD and CAO reports relative to authority to negotiate and execute a contract with Rydek Computer Professionals and 3DI Inc. for information technology professional services in an amount not to exceed $900,000 for each contract for a 1-year term starting January 1, 2012 through December 31, 2012, with an option to renew for 2 additional 1-year periods.
Okay. Any questions from the members of the committee on item number 2? Okay. Seeing none, then what we'll do is we'll approve the CAO's recommendations. That item's approved. We now move to item number 3.
Chair, I do want to speak on 3.
On 3?
Yeah.
Item number 3 are CLA and CAO reports with assistance from the LAHD regarding an analysis of the implications relevant to the transfer of the housing functions of the former CRA LA to the city and resolutions to be submitted by the city attorney and related actions.
Okay, thank you very much. We do have public comment cards on item number 3. We'll open it up to public comment first, and then we'll bring up the staff for their reports. Steve Kafra, please come forward. We have Brock Harris. We have Dora Gallo and Robin Hughes. Let me clarify. Linda Miller and Louise Eisenstein, you're here for general public comment, correct? Yeah. Not on this item, you're here for general. Okay, got it. Okay. Start to my right.
Good morning. Steve Cockroft here with AFSCME. We represent the 4 bargaining units at the CRA LA, and wanted to start off by thanking the CLA and the CAO. They are men of few compliments, but their report confirms that we represent the best darn housing workforce anywhere. We can do the work of the HACLA and also the LAHD. And that alone should be reason enough to take on those housing functions and bring the staff from the CRA LA in order to continue that great work. But though the CLA and CAO we're appreciative of their approval, they got it a little bit wrong in terms of transferring the employees. The City of Los Angeles approved our MOUs back in March of 2008. And within them, we have provisions which require that if the city transfer the functions of the CRA LA to the city, that they are required to carry the employees and their existing benefits. And so we ask that, similar to what the City Council did in conjunction with the co-op agreement earlier in 2011, that an amendment to this motion is made to make sure that the employees at CRALA who are performing the work and who are talented, obviously, continue to do that work, and that their wages and benefits are incorporated therein as well. We thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. Dora?
Yes. Good morning. My name is Dora Gallo. I'm with the Community of Friends. We're a regional nonprofit housing developer, primarily doing supportive housing. In fact, we actually have projects in the districts represented by all of you here today. We have been working very closely with the Housing Department and the Redevelopment Agency, and we do support the report that's been issued today, the recommendation of the CAO and CLA. We believe, our agency believes, and many other people here today who will speak to you, believe that this is the best course of action at this point in time. Having redevelopment eliminated is certainly not something that we support, but at the same time, there's an opportunity to retain the housing funds locally, and we urge you to do so, and we urge you to adopt the report recommended by the two staff agencies today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin?
Good morning. My name is Robin Hughes. I'm with Abode Communities. We're also a regional nonprofit affordable housing developer. And I, too, am here to speak in support of the CAO and CLA's report to have the city assume the housing assets and housing functions of the redevelopment agency, and that the Los Angeles Housing Department be given the opportunity to administer those programs as laid out in the report. And I think, as I commented last time I was before this committee, I believe that the Housing Department is well equipped to take over these functions in terms of its infrastructure and lending as well as asset management. So I hope that this committee will make a affirmative recommendation to the City Council today to adopt the CAO's and CLA's report.
Thank you. I just want to confirm, Brock Harris, thank you. Brock Harris, you filled out a card, but you are passing on the opportunity to speak, correct? He left. Okay, he left. All right. With that, that concludes the public comment cards on item number 3.
Mr. Chair, we have more cards, I believe.
More cards? Okay. Okay. Jim Bonner, Neil McGuffin, Jana Gerald,
Grace? Chana Grace?
what works? Chana, I'm sorry, you can restate your name when you come up, and Ben Phillips. Go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Jim Bonner with Clifford Beers Housing. We're a not-for-profit producer of low and moderate income housing that also assists people with mental illness. We support the recommendation to have the housing department take over the assets, the housing assets. But we're here, we have special interest in a project called Casa de Rosas. It does not have an enforceable obligation, which puts it into a cloudy position. It is a project which has been serving as housing, and both shelter and permanent housing for many, many years. But because it does not fit the definition of an enforceable obligation, it raises it. There is still some question about it. So what's important is that it receive a housing definition. I've seen it on some lists as a community service facility. But housing, I think, is what it. We were selected by the redevelopment agency staff to negotiate exclusively to develop a housing project, and we would very much like to continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Neil McGuffin, Corporation for Supportive Housing, a national intermediary working to prevent and end homelessness. That we would hope that the committee would support the recommendation that the city assume the functions. That, like one of the previous speakers had mentioned, that through our partnership with LAHD, we've provided loans for development of permanent supportive housing in everyone's district here. that we have thousands of units currently in the pipeline, including those noted in the report with CRA 5% money, that most recently I think that there was a $10 million allocation for supportive housing in the city, and that there was over $40 million in requests, so that the need is great, and that we would hope that you would support this recommendation that the city assume the function so that we can continue to create supportive housing throughout the city. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Chaney Grace, and I'm with Works, and we are a local nonprofit developing both affordable housing and special needs housing. And I think it's important to note, I'm here with my colleagues to support both the CAO and the CLA's recommendation, and I hope you support that also. But it's important to note that affordable housing, in addition to being much needed in many of the communities where it's located, is a job generator. And especially for our city at this time, the jobs that are developed through building affordable housing are very important to our city and to the communities in which they're located. So I'm hopeful that you will agree in the affirmative to take this to the City Council and support its action. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben Phillips. I'm the Regional Director and Vice President for Mercy Housing here in Southern California. I also am speaking in support of the recommendations. This is a very uncertain time as redevelopment is winding down, but I believe the consensus legal opinion is that if the city adopts these measures, that as of February 1st, all of these housing functions, including pipeline projects and existing assets, will, by operation of law, become, fall under the authority of the city and LAHD's acting on its behalf. That's very important because there's a lot of developments in the pipeline, obviously, that need to be expeditiously handled, as well as, the ultimate disposition and stewardship of these properties, which, should they fall to another agency, might not have the city's interests at heart. Mercy Housing has 3 developments that fall into sort of the current pipeline category that I'd like to note. Jefferson Park Terrace and Carolyn Severance Manor are both, as well as Washington Boulevard, Washington Santee Phase 1 and 2 in Councilwoman Perry's district, are all, we believe, enforceable obligations. They do not appear on all of the lists. They're not on the Washington Boulevard and Jefferson Park Terrace are not on the EOPS list. However, 2 of them are on the cooperation agreement list that's attached to the CLA report. The notable exception is the Washington Boulevard developments, which we do have a disposition and development agreement that was approved by the agency prior to the deadlines set forth in AB 26 and 27, but it was never executed. We still believe and have submitted legal documentation that it is an enforceable obligation, and we would hope to work with LAHD starting February 1st to complete that development. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Dean Matsubayashi and Jeff Schafer, Paul Zimmerman, and Remy de la Pesa. Dean, go ahead.
Good morning. My name is Dean Matsubayashi, and I'm with the Little Tokyo Service Center, and we are a neighborhood-based social service and community development organization based here in downtown Los Angeles. I'm here today, like many others in this room, to speak in strong support of the recommendation to designate the LA Housing Department as the successor housing entity for the CRA LA's affordable housing assets and obligations. For over 2 decades, my organization, like many other organizations in this room, has been developing affordable housing for the most economically challenged in our city. It's important to note that we're not just about building housing, but also about building community and building hope, and that our projects aim to create and foster a greater sense of economic self-sufficiency amongst our residents by combining quality affordable housing with strong on-site services. On a larger level, our projects also generate living wage construction jobs and leverage scarce public dollars with other public and private financing. For our project with CRA funding, for every $1 of CRA funds, we leverage $5 to $7 of additional funding. Unfortunately, this strength can also be a weakness or negative during chaotic times like today, when AB 26 we eliminate redevelopment agencies, but also one of the largest sources of affordable housing. The AB 26 will also transfer the redevelopment agency's assets to a successor housing entity, which once again we strongly support being LHD. LHD is most familiar with the projects in our pipeline and has extensive experience closing these types of loans and monitoring long-term regulatory compliance. And this experience and track record is critical to ensuring that our projects close efficiently and on schedule. Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Thank you, sir. My name is Jeff Schafer. I'm Vice President at Enterprise Community Partners. We're a national nonprofit helping to advance affordable housing and community development. We are a community development financial institution, and so we've put loan dollars into some of these projects. We're a syndicator of low-income housing tax credits. We're very committed to bringing resources to Los Angeles to support affordable housing and community development. And we have a good understanding of the mix of financing that goes into the development and long-term operation of affordable housing. Local control of these redevelopment dollars will play a key role in helping to leverage the timely input of federal, state, and private resources. There is a time sensitivity to the movement of these dollars. And there are covenants at risk, affordability covenants at risk, if local control is not maintained. So I join my colleagues sitting to the left and right of me in encouraging the council to adopt the CAO-CLA recommendation.
Thank you. Paul?
Good morning. I'm Paul Zimmerman. I'm Executive Director of the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. We represent the nonprofit community development organizations throughout the city. I'd like just to take a second and ask anyone in the audience who is supportive of the motion to please stand for just a moment and get a sense of the unanimity. We have been conducting a dialogue throughout this whole transition period. Thank you, folks. And I could say that there has absolutely been no dissent about the importance of the transition to the housing department and to support the CAO-CLO's recommendations. We're talking about a great number of projects in the pipeline, as my colleagues have mentioned, and there's a great deal of urgency to meet third-party financing deadlines and get these projects closed. And it's quite obvious the housing department has the expertise to make that happen. We also have tens of thousands of projects in a legacy portfolio that are very important to protect, and the housing department has got the most extensive experience in the city in monitoring compliance on covenants and managing this type of portfolio. So we really urge the committee to affirmatively recommend to the full council that the motion pass. Thank you.
Thank you. Remy?
Good morning. My name is Remy Della Pesta. I'm a staff attorney in the Community Development Project at Public Counsel. Public Counsel represents low-income clients and the organizations that serve them throughout LA County. And over the years, the CRA has funded thousands of units of affordable housing for our client base and has contributed to the economic development of low-income communities throughout LA. I, too, am here to strongly support the city's retention of housing assets and functions within LAHD and urge you to honor the commitments that have already been made to benefit these low-income communities and residents by ensuring a seamless and timely transition of all housing responsibilities. Specifically, AB 26, I think we all know, clearly requires that all CRA housing assets, functions, rights, powers, duties, and obligations will automatically transfer as a matter of law to the successor housing agency on February 1st. I'm here to urge that as part of the documentation of this transfer, that a couple things specifically be included. One, all assets obtained with housing funds, CRA housing funds. I know pursuant to the CAO report, mixed source assets so far are designated to stay with the successor agency until the oversight board will be in place. However, given the uncertainty as to when this will happen, to avoid potential defaults related to these assets being stuck in limbo, we'd like you to consider identifying and transferring any predominantly housing assets obtained with mixed funds to the successor housing agency on February 1st, along with all 100% housing fund assets. And then as well to all enforceable obligations related to housing and intended to further CRA's housing functions, including those that are on the current EOPS, as well as those that may not require payouts over the next 4 months, but are still considered enforceable housing obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes all the public comment cards on item number 3. Public comment on item number 3 is now closed. We can have the staff come forward. Who's here on behalf of the City Attorney's Office?
Kurt Kidder, Assistant City Attorney.
Okay.
Michael Keck, CLA's office. I'm just going to provide a brief overview of the report, and then Anne-Marie, my colleague at CAO, will provide some additional details. So on December 29th, the California Supreme Court, as we all know, ruled that AB 1X27 was unconstitutional and upheld AB 1X26, the redevelopment elimination bill. As a result, the city had 2 important decisions to make. Number 1, whether to adopt a resolution to opt out of becoming the successor agency, whose main purpose was to close out CRA-LA redevelopment activities, who was also subject to approval of the Oversight Board and the State Department of Finance. And the second major decision was whether the city would retain the housing functions and assets of CRA-LA. Specifically, AB 1X26 reads that the city that authorized the creation of the redevelopment agency may elect to retain the housing assets and functions previously performed by the redevelopment agency. During the successor agency discussion, our offices raised a number of issues, including, number 1, the lack of influence over the closeout of CRA-LA projects through the composition of the Oversight Board, among other factors, the costs and complications associated with the retention of 193 CRA-LA employees with only partial funding, the city's potential exposure to lawsuits associated with the actions of the Oversight Board, and the lack of clear language associated with the implementation of the redevelopment elimination bill. In light of these substantial unknowns and potential impacts to the general fund, our office has recommended that it is not in the city's best interest at this time to become the successor agency. Subsequently, on January 11th, Council, with the later concurrence of the mayor, adopted a resolution to opt out of being the successor agency, but the decision before you today is different. Today, your committee is discussing whether the city and subsequently LEHD will retain the housing functions and assets of CRA-LA, which will be dissolved as of February 1st. Unlike the successor agency, the city entity doesn't require the city to retain any employees, although becoming the housing entity will require additional resources both in the short and long term, which the CAO's office will discuss in further detail. Number 2, not all actions of the housing entity are subject to the approval of the Oversight and State Department of Finance, like the successor agency. Number 3, the city would retain the ability to monitor affordable housing covenants, some of which will last until 2075. Number 4, some of the projects that were funded by low, moderate, and income housing and affordable housing trust fund dollars will come back to the city. And this will also have the potential to limit our exposure to future litigations to only housing projects. In the event that the city decides to not become the housing entity, AB 1X26 states that the housing functions and assets will be transferred to HACLA for administration. On page 3 of the joint CAO and CLA report before you today, there's a list of pros and cons associated with HACLA as the housing entity and LEHD as the housing entity. After a thorough analysis, our office recommends that the city adopt a resolution to opt in as the housing entity. Because of LHD's familiarity with CRA-LA housing projects, their experience monitoring affordable housing covenants, and because LHD possesses the infrastructure necessary to assume CRA-LA housing assets and functions.
And related to the housing assets and functions, our offices did contact the Department of Finance to obtain clarification regarding the legislation and the definition of a housing asset. And based on the advice of Department of Finance, anything obtained or funded with CRA 20% low and moderate income housing funds is a housing asset. And that also includes the additional 5% set aside for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. In addition, the CRA's existing loan portfolio that is funded with low and moderate income housing funds would be an asset transferred to the housing entity. The housing assets listed on the EOPS will be transferred to the city as the successor housing entity, along with any encumbered balances in the low and moderate income housing funds, which would be used by the successor housing entity to pay for housing-related obligations. There is also a bill that's currently in the State Senate, SB 654, that's the Steinberg Bill, and should that be enacted, any unencumbered balances in the low and moderate income housing fund would also transfer to the housing entity. And the Housing Department estimates that there is approximately $104 million in unencumbered funds in the low and moderate income housing fund. Michael touched on the affordability piece and the housing covenants, and currently there are approximately 23 housing covenants in place through 2075 and an additional 6,000 more units of affordable housing in the development pipeline. And while both LHD and CRA are familiar with this, we believe that the Housing Department is in the best position to continue to monitor and enforce compliance with affordability covenants citywide. There is a piece regarding Section 8 because the CRA currently serves as contract administrator for 31 Section 8 projects until 2015. And while the Housing Department does not currently monitor any Section 8 projects, that would be included in their report back to the Mayor and Council on the staffing and resources piece. The Department of Finance made it very clear that the city cannot access the 5% and 3% administrative funds that are part of AB 126. However, the Housing Department will be able to retain the program income generated by the loan portfolio and can use these funds to pay for staff costs. And as I mentioned, the Housing Department will provide additional staffing projections, both short and long term, as part of a report back to Mayor and Council. There are some liabilities, as Michael mentioned. However, it should be noted that as a housing entity, the city's exposure to potential litigation would be limited to housing projects. And as he indicated, in conclusion, we recommend approving a resolution to opt in as the housing entity and designate the Housing Department as the city's representative to carry out these functions and responsibilities.
Thank you. Housing Department?
Yes, Doug Guthrie, the General Manager of the Housing Department. We fully concur in the recommendations of the CAO and CLA. We've been working very closely with them, particularly over the last 2 weeks, in trying to understand the implications of transferring all the housing assets over to the LA Housing Department. So I think we're all on the same page with where that currently stands. I would point out a couple of really critical issues here in this consideration. One is the fact that there are 23,000 units that CRA currently has that has affordable housing covenants attached to those loans. Those would be jeopardized if the city was not in a position to take over the responsibilities for those loan portfolios. So it's absolutely critical that we retain that affordability as a starting point. Secondly, I think that was brought up in the public comment earlier, we have a large pipeline of development deals that we've worked concurrently on with CRA as well as with the Housing Department, where on many of these we already have housing dollars, including federal housing dollars, invested in this development pipeline that would be put at risk if we were not to make sure that these developments move to conclusion at this point. So I believe strongly that the Housing Department is best positioned to make the smoothest transfer possible of the housing assets, and it's clearly an appropriate role for us to be doing so.
Councilmember Perry?
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm really pleased that the report is recommending, the CLA and CAO report is recommending that the city opt in and become a housing successor agency or entity. I think it's the responsible thing to do in order to protect I thought it was about 29,000 units of affordable housing, but give or take, it doesn't matter. We've got to protect this housing stock. And I recognize that there are some risks associated with becoming the housing successor entity, but it's also my understanding that the oversight ordinance may be ready for review as soon as next week. And I think that the risks far outweigh the benefit of helping to make sure that we preserve this housing, monitor and develop what was in the pipeline already. And just for the record, and I don't have a problem saying this, is I think it was a privilege to work with the redevelopment agency because we did get so much done, and the affordable housing development community, and it's been a great collaboration. And sorry that it came to such a terrible end, but this is a pretty good save. And then we can continue to do the work on transformative projects, transformative affordable housing projects like the new Carver or like mixed-use development at Adams and Central. So I know that if the city opts in with this housing successor entity, there will be a lot of work, new work, and responsibility shifted to the housing department. But, you know, I'm confident that we're all on the same page and that we want to move forward. Now, it's also worth noting that the report, and this is on the plus side of things, notes that we would not inherit or assume the burden of associated salaries, pension liabilities, and those sorts of things that would have come from the CRA. So, you know, we don't take on those burdens or those liabilities. So I think that this is a very good move forward to save a piece of what we've already started.
Thank you. Councilmember Alarcon.
I concur with 99% of what Jan Perry said. As I'm often opposed to the 1%, in this case, I'm concerned. I didn't see anything in the resolution that addresses the issue of the employees. So I want to be clear. If we pass this resolution, does it assume that we will not transfer CRA employees to manage these projects?
At this point, the way the housing piece works is it does not assume the employees would be transferred.
No, I'm asking about the specific action.
The resolution itself.
The resolution and motions therein. Therefore, it be resolved. I didn't see anything that addressed the issue of the employees.
Well, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, AB 26 states that all the employees...
No, I'm not talking about AB 26. I'm talking about this action before us.
You're correct. The resolution is silent as to employees because it's not contemplated that any agency employees would be transferred to the city as the successor.
But it is not, the answer is no, right?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, okay, so because I don't think anybody has any problem with moving in the direction of housing. I think there's broad consensus to do that. But the union representative has raised a critical issue as to whether or not there is an obligation. The union disagrees with the LA-CAO's analysis that there is no obligation, and there is no city attorney opinion on this matter. So the question is, now, has the CLA performed an analysis as to whether or not the CRA employees have a collective bargaining agreement that includes transfer of responsibilities from the CRA, and in such cases the employees would also have to be transferred?
Michael Keck, CLA's office. Through our process of putting together this report, we looked at AB 26 as really how the structure and what the liabilities would be for the city. We can report back, if you like, at a later time and to discuss specifically and work with the city attorney to flesh out that issue, if you would like.
I would, but has the city attorney looked at that?
Mr. Chair, members of the council, I have not specifically looked at that issue. I don't have enough familiarity with the MOUs, so I couldn't comment on it right now, other than to say that AB 20, it's not required under AB 26.
Right, and I don't think the union said it was required under AB 26. They said it was required under the collective bargaining agreement. Mr. Chair, I would support the resolution as is, but I think we need to have a clear understanding as to what obligations we have to the employees at the CRA with regard to transferring services from the CRA to the housing department. And at a minimum, we need a legal analysis on that question from our city attorney's office.
Should this move forward, the CAO CLA report, it'll be heard in council today. So what we'll do, Councilmember Alarcon, is instruct the CLA, the CAO, and the city attorney's office to tell us in council how many weeks, is it 2 weeks or what have you, that they can do that analysis that you requested, and then give us a report back on that in detail? Okay.
I would so move that as part of any action we do today.
I'll actually second it.
Oh, geez.
Okay. Scary.
And the housing
brings us to
department will be
100%
coming
agreement.
back with
So
their-
now you're at 100%, okay.
I was just also going to add that in addition to reporting in council, the housing department will be coming back with a transition plan that may address the employee piece as well, because...
Some of it, but we
Some of it.
still need to get a
In
full
terms of
analysis on the
council saying we will
MOU and the
prepared
legality
to
of
do
it.
that.
Okay, all right. Any more questions? Okay.
Just one more report back.
Ms. Perry.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to ask for one more report back from the CLA-CAO regarding the development of an economic development department and the inclusion of these housing assets. I want to make sure that when we establish the economic development department, these housing assets are part of the consideration. Also, I'd like to know when the CLA and CAO plan to report to us on a citywide economic development department plan.
Okay. So you want to report back as part of, okay.
Yeah.
Got it. We'll make that part of the motion. And in addition to that, we move to approve the CLA-CAO report and instruct the CLA-CAO and the city attorney's office to answer the question as to when they will be prepared to report to this council on the MOU matter between the CRA employees and the housing department taking on this responsibility. Okay. Okay. With that, that item is approved as amended, and now we have general public comment. General public comment is for speaking of matters that are not on the agenda, but are pertinent to this committee. We have Linda Miller, Louis Eisenstein, please come forward. David Chaney, and Bill Huey. You may begin. Sure.
Okay. My name's David Chaney. I'm a housing provider here in Los Angeles. Although I wasn't part of the included in the agenda on the CRLA, I would like to say that I think we mustn't lose sight of the fact that that money, the redevelopment money, which was our tax dollars after all, is now being rediverted to educating our youth. And I think it's really important that we remember that, first of all. And I'm very in favor of low-income housing. I myself personally provide housing for 20 people, some of which are rent-controlled in the $400 range a month. My concern, and I know this is not about item 3, but I'd just like to address that. My concern is that looking at the amount of overhead that is included in the low-income housing, we all know that you guys spend almost $600,000 or $700,000 a door for low-income housing in some subsidized areas. It is not cost-effective. Anyhow, having said that, I'm really appreciative of you tabling moving forward the motion on item 7. The 3% is so minimal as it is. I recently, for example, on one of my places, I got a notice from the fire department. I did everything I was requested to do, and then I was red tagged for work that I wasn't even cited for, and it cost me $300. Well, you know what? I get $1,000 a month for my 2 rent-controlled tenants in that area. That doesn't even cover 3% hardly a year. Just that one citation, which I had there was nothing for me to do. There's no appeal for that, you know. And one other thing I'd like to mention, I think, and this is probably make some of my landlord friends a little bit irritated with me, but I want to address an issue of fairness. I lost a building to foreclosure. One of my tenants was in there. The new owner took it over, attested. He's a lawyer. He perjured himself. He said he was going to live there. He did not. He sold the place, moved the tenant out. There was an investigation. The person who's managing the thing said too late. I'm like, what is the point of the ordinance if it's too late? That's when it's supposed to take effect, when the person's moved out illegally. I would love somebody up there to please let me know who I go to, because I find the unfairness of that is very bad.
Jim D'Antona will give you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next. We'll start to my right.
Yes, my name is Linda Miller, and I'm a landlord in Los Angeles. I'm here to express my concerns about the Skep program and the housing department. I find that I've been dealing with them for the past 10 years, and my record speaks for itself. I've only had one eviction in the past 25 years and no complaints filed by tenants. However, the housing department has continuously fined me unnecessarily and then added usury late charges to those fines. These were given without any opportunity to appeal, without any opportunity to present evidence at a hearing, and to cause continuous re-inspections that bothers both me and my tenants. I found that the inspectors are both rude and ignorant, and for the most part are incompetent. And also internal to LAHD, I have provided documentation that the LAHD refuses to review, and if the document that I provide for them to review is in conflict with the current documents, they say it's a mistake. Now, I'm a landlord. I have one property that I own, so I know what has gone on in the past. I don't expect the housing department to remember every inspection. However, to continuously imply that I am lying about something, I don't appreciate, and I think that you should investigate the housing department's treatment of landlords like me. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Louis. I'm a housing provider in the city of LA. I'm opposed to the CRA moving towards the housing department just because I've dealt with the housing department and I know how they utilize the REAP program. There's no more vacant lots in the city of LA, so the only way these nonprofits can buy lots or buy property is through REAP, and they put these properties in REAP. There's a lien on them. They have bad title, so banks won't give them a loan. The only people that will give them a loan are the CRA. So the CRA is buying all these REAP properties, redeveloping them, and then kicking out the old land, basically stealing people's property. So I oppose to that. I'd rather see the CRA money go into private landlords. I think we'd make more effective use of that money. We'd revitalize neighborhoods, and we'd build properties at a much lower cost than these nonprofits. I also want to talk about the Skep program. There was a recent ruling by a judge, Judge Yaffe, I believe, and he said that the Los Angeles Housing Department were acting out of bounds. They were creating a law out of thin air, which is illegal, and they were not following city council law, basically. What they were doing is saying the housing department could cite matters of building code, and that's not anywhere in the law. So I don't know how, that's like a police officer citing a landlord for something. It makes no sense. This writ of mandate, we passed it around, and we already got some feedback from other landlords. They said, the inspector said, we don't care about that ruling. We're just going to ignore it. I mean, that's the response the housing department has to a judge, a state superior court judge. So we're in a bind here. The status quo is not acceptable. I'm glad that stuff is tabled, but we need to change things in a huge manner if we want to remain in the city and invest in housing.
Hi, my name is Bill Huey. I'm the president of Fair Housing Coalition. I have an idea that I think the city of LA should get out of the apartment rental business. I know the city acquired 1,100 units last year, and the problem is the LA Housing Authority, we all know about the scandals and the misappropriation of funds. I think and plus, when the housing authority has work done by contractors, they overbuild the city. I've read the articles where they put roofs on buildings and charge the city 5 times the going rate. I think a more practical approach would be to close down the housing authority, for the city to sell all its rental units to the private sector, to good landlords who are going to take care of the people, and then with that money the city's saving, give homeless people and low-income people a rent subsidy, a coupon. If a guy says, I got 5 kids, but I can only afford $300 a month for an apartment, but he needs a 3-bedroom apartment, then give him $1,200 a month. He can go find an apartment that's clean, that's good enough for his family, to accommodate the size of his family, and the taxpayer will get more bang for the buck. The city will have less of a problem on its hands. And we know that there's people that go into city buildings and city residences, and they fall down and have these trip and falls, and they sue the city. It will take the city away from that type of litigation, and I think everyone can be best served. I don't think there should be any homeless people at all in L.A. There's a lot of decent landlords that if they can get fair market value so they can pay their bills, pay their taxes, and maintain the apartments properly, they'll take in the poorest of the people. They're not anti-homeless or anti-poor people. They just got to be able to pay their bills, and I think we can partner with the city so the city gives the poor people the coupon, they give it to the landlords, and yes, the city can send somebody out once a year to make sure that this coupon money is being spent, the people are getting good, clean housing. It's sort of a partnership. We can close this huge bureaucracy that's costing the city money, and it doesn't serve, and more people are still homeless, and the taxpayers not getting their money's worth.
Very good.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we have on general public comment, Sabrina Simmons and Kamyar Lashgari. Go ahead. Okay. Yes, see downstairs. Go ahead.
I'd like to piggyback on what Mr. Hui said.
Your name again?
Sabrina Simmons.
Thank you, Sabrina.
I think he makes a very good point. Perhaps I'll be a little more direct. I don't think that our Los Angeles Housing Department understands how to properly use the money that they are collecting. I believe Mr. Guthrie pointed out that they had over $100 million that they are not using appropriately. However, they have been collecting it. I can also support what the first speaker said regarding the incompetence and arrogance of the inspectors that come out to look at the property of landlords. And there does seem to be a very strong bias with those inspectors that the tenant can do no wrong regardless of the evidence, and everything is the fault of the landlord. Clearly, this is not working, and I would actually recommend a complete overhaul of the housing department. And the idea of putting more on their plate via transferring the housing authority department to them, I think is a significantly less than bright idea. Thank you.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Kamyar Lashgari. I'm a property owner. We took over a property that was through the REAP program by default. And aside from the issues of LAHD and all the problems that have been raised here, I wanted to bring your attention to the fact that LAHD, or the Housing Department, has abrogated its authority at the end of all of the efforts that the property owner goes through to get clearances for all the violations. LAHD throws their hands up and they say that they cannot get us out of REAP because now we are dealing with agencies outside the city's jurisdiction, such as the County of Los Angeles Health Department. Since we have taken over this project about a year and a half ago, we spent a few months addressing the LAHD violations, building and safety violations, fire department violations. We have satisfied all of these different agencies, and they all have told us at different levels of staff that we have to be able to get out of REAP, but they can't get us out of REAP. They can't take us to the city council to get us out of REAP because they have another agency outside the city making the decision for them. If you have set up a bureaucracy to advocate for the tenants by the virtue of this outside agency, you have created a situation where you have no authority over your own decisions. Once you have a property owner who wants to improve the quality of life for the tenants, and they bring it to a point where everybody is satisfied, you still can't get us out of REAP. So you have created a bureaucracy that is basically self-defeating, even in the intended version of LAHD staff telling us that they want to protect the tenants, and they're always on the side of the tenants. At the end of the day, you end up degrading the quality of life for these tenants by not allowing us to get out of REAP and create better environment for these tenants. And you have no control over county health department, and you have to get a hold of that.
Thank you. That concludes general public comment for this committee. We have concluded the items on the agenda and general public comment. And general public comment is closed. This committee is now adjourned.